We ended the last volume with Sanji getting into contact with the leader of Baroque Works, so let's see how he manages to take control of the situation. But before we do, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend, and join the Discord server by following the link in the description below. And with all that being said, let's jump into One Piece Volume 15, straight ahead, featuring chapters 127 to 136. Part 1, Leaving Little Garden. This will cover chapters 127 to 129. There is a lot of stuff going on in this part of the volume, so for the sake of simplicity, let's pick up right where we ended off in the last volume, with Sanji talking to Mr. Zero via the transponder snail. I've mentioned Sanji's intelligence before, but this entire interaction could be Exhibit A as to why Sanji is one of the most level-headed characters under pressure in any given situation. Sanji puts context clues together based on the information being fed to him by Mr. Zero, and picks up the role of Mr. 3 right away, informing Mr. Zero that Princess Vivi and the Straw Hats have been eliminated and that Baroque Works no longer needs to worry about them as a threat. This is when we get some key pieces of information and an important item to continue our journey. First, Mr. Zero is calling the Baroque Works agents back to Alabasta, meaning that his ultimate plan is finally set into motion, and as a result increases the sense of urgency on the Straw Hats situation. But more importantly, thanks to Sanji eliminating the Unluckies, we obtain an eternal log post that will lead us directly towards Alabasta. The same kind of pose Miss All Sunday offered us earlier in the story. I didn't mention this earlier, but Bragi informed Usopp and Nami that it would take an entire year for their normal log post to reset. But now that we have an eternal log post, we can make our way to Alabasta as soon as possible. This is when Sanji regroups with the others and we get some incredible news, as Dory survived the attack by Bragi thanks to the sharpness of their blades being worn down after years of fighting. And this is when we get a very clear picture about the two giants and their clashing. They don't clash for anything more than the kinship it provides to them both. The two really don't even remember what their fight was about. They just fight to fill the void in their lives and give themselves purpose and a reason to interact with one another every day. Well, I say they don't have a reason to fight, but their memory is somewhat jogged when Sanji and Zoro begin their argument over who captured the bigger animal. But this debate is quickly quelled as the group agreed to make their journey to Alabasta using the Eternal Pose. And as the crew departs, we watch as Dory and Bragi pay their respects to Luffy, Usopp, and their friends as they use their combined powers to allow the Straw Hat crew to move towards Alabasta through the giant island eater goldfish. While the visual of Dory and Bragi using their combined powers is cool, my favorite part of this scene was Luffy placing his unbridled faith in the giant's order of moving straight forward. Despite the monster in their path, Luffy trusts his friends. Admittedly more than I would in this particular situation, but like always, Luffy's faith pays off, and the Straw Hats are launched forward and continue their journey towards Alabasta. This is when we also find out that Dory and Bragi's entire feud stemmed from a little girl asking the two about whose catch was bigger, the same exact feud that brewed between Zoro and Sanji. I know that there were a lot of people who honestly believe Zoro and Sanji hate each other, but I think this is Oda showing us that they have a relationship similar to that of Dory and Bragi. They might quarrel and argue, but at the end of the day, they care about each other, and would do whatever is necessary to protect their friend if something happened. I also find it fitting that the two giants mentioned the giant poop left behind by the goldfish, calling back to a story Usopp told Kaya back in his introductory arc. This not only means that maybe Usopp's lies will all come true eventually, but once again solidifies Usopp's connection with the giants and his goal of reaching the island of Elbaf one day. But as this section of the volume ends, the good times come to an abrupt end, as Vivi watches Nami fall to the ground as she catches a terrible fever. Part 2, Wapple. This will cover chapters 130 to 132. So, Nami is down for the count with a bad fever, and according to Vivi, her temperature indicates that if Nami's condition continues to get worse, there is a chance she could die. This changes the group's focus, as now they are in desperate need of a doctor, and that is what their new plan of action will be. Right? Well, Nami throws a curveball into the plan as she reveals a newspaper article showing that a large group of royal guards in Alabasta have defected to a rebel group seeking to overthrow the king, meaning that a conflict is brewing back at home for Vivi, and the stakes continue to get higher. I think this section does a lot in the way of character development for Nami, and outside of her introductory arc, this is my favorite portion of the story featuring her so far. Nami refuses to let her condition slow down the crew, not for her sake, but because she cares for Vivi and knows that Vivi is on borrowed time. Nami fakes her own recovery for the sake of a friend. Even when we, the audience, know that she is on the brink of death, she remained steadfast in her conviction not to show weakness and not let her illness slow her down, all so she can help Vivi. This is when Vivi returns the favor and demands that the crew find a doctor quickly so they can heal Nami and continue towards Alabasta, a proposition that everyone happily agrees to. Oh, and before I forget this, Nami also has an incredibly badass scene where she predicts a deadly storm is coming and gets the crew to change their course right in the nick of time. And is a skill that Vivi mentions is unbelievable, something that naturally comes to Nami. Luffy might have an ultra instinct in battle, but Nami has an ultra instinct in navigation. And as the crew begin their search for a nearby island in hopes of finding a doctor, Zoro notices a weird creature standing on the water. Outside of this scene featuring an incredibly funny series of panels with neither party knowing what the heck is going on, he watches a giant submarine surfaces next to the Going Merry, and we are introduced to the man who looks strikingly like a hippopotamus, the tyrant Wapple. And he comes with an interesting gimmick, as he eats a sword and then takes a massive bite out of the ship. Not only does this enrage Luffy, but it leads to the crew easily dispatching of Wapple's forces, and an admittedly hilarious conclusion to the fight from Luffy, who manages to hit Wapple away while simultaneously being inside his mouth. Seriously, it is an incredibly wacky scene, and I absolutely love it. As Wapple's minions make a mad dash to find him, we are reminded of an island mentioned by the tyrant on the ship, an island by the name of Drum, and coincidentally, there's a snow island ahead that the crew hopes might be home of a doctor who can provide aid to Nami. This is also when we get some new lore added to the story, as Vivi explains that there are 4 different types of islands: Summer Islands, Winter Islands, Autumn Islands, and Spring Islands, and each of these islands will have varying degrees of climate intensity. I love the way Oda builds lore because none of this is technically new information, as we were told about this concept as soon as we entered the Grand Line. But now we are given more information about how everything works. This is a great way of not overwhelming the audience with information and making your story easier to follow. So once again, great work, Oda. And as we arrive at the island that we presume to be Drum, we watch as the townspeople are not welcoming, going so far as to shoot Vivi in the shoulder after Luffy shows hostility towards them. And as Luffy prepares to fight, Vivi does something we haven't really seen before, as she tells Luffy that he has failed as a captain and encourages him to follow her lead, bowing to the townspeople and begging for their help. And sure enough, as soon as Luffy does this, the townspeople welcome the group into their town. And as Luffy acknowledges how smart Vivi is, watch as the group makes their way into the Snowy Kingdom with no name. Part 3, No Name Country. This will cover chapters 133 to 136. This final part of the volume sees the crew all split up once again, so I'm going to cover each of the factions, what we discover, and how it sets up the next volume. But before we deep dive, let me quickly go over the current state we find ourselves in. We watch as a group arrives in town with some admittedly hilarious imagery of giant snow bears and other creatures, and we first learn about an upcoming election where the leader of the town, Dalton, is favored to be elected. We will learn more about this later, but importantly, find out that all of the country's doctors have left, and the sole doctor remaining, who goes by the name of Dr. Kureha, lives on top of the Drum Rockies. Despite the journey to visit the doctor being perilous, Nami expresses her faith in Luffy to rescue her from her illness, and the groups are set in stone. Luffy and Sanji will carry Nami to the top of the Drum Rockies in order to find Dr. Kureha. Usopp and Vivi will remain with Dalton, and Zoro stays at the ship with Karu. While the remainder of the video will not go in chronological order, I'm going to break down each of these groups, starting with Zoro and Karu. This group is the easiest to discuss, as Zoro simply decides to go for a swim in the icy water so he can train, and Karu watches on in disbelief in an admittedly funny scene. And while this is all we truly see of the group, I want to take this time to discuss our important introduction to Dr. Kureha and her reindeer assistant, Chopper. We first learn of Kureha from Dalton, who describes her as a witch. And this description is pretty accurate when we first meet her. She is 139 years old, has a wicked laugh, and scares the townspeople of coca weed before treating an injured child. And while Kureha initially demands most of the shop's asset, the child thanks her for healing his injury, causing her to reduce her payment by 1% and encouraging the child to never forget the feeling they received when they were cured from their illness. This goes to show that while Kureha might appear to be some wicked lady who is money hungry, she does care about her job and does possess a remarkable amount of medical expertise. But this is all we really see from Kureha in this volume, so let's move back over to Usopp and Vivi. Usopp and Vivi listen to Dalton as he explains the tragedy that has befallen the country formerly known as Drum. Not only was the country attacked a few months ago by a pirate known as Blackbeard, but the king of the country abandoned them and took all of the doctors with him. And that man is none other than Wapple. This foreshadows the importance of the arc for Vivi, as we see her struggling with the realization that Wapple abandoned his people and left them to fight for themselves, the polar opposite of what she is doing for her country and her people. We also get a bit of a hint that Vivi's backstory has something to do with Wapple, which was teased all the way back when Wapple attacked the Going Merry. This will be something we continue to watch because once the group is made aware of Dr. Kureha's absence from her castle, we watch as the group attempts to warn Sanji and Luffy about her whereabouts. And speaking of the Drum Mountain group, let's talk about them now. Sanji and Luffy have the most comedic story of the other groups as we see them talking about all of the myths and rumors they have heard about people living in snowy kingdoms, such as this one. This is also when we encounter the formidable creatures known as Lapins, who are giant bunny rabbits with incredible strength, who attempt to attack Sanji and Luffy at every turn. The Lapins pose an even bigger threat, considering Luffy is taken out of the battle since he's carrying Nami on his back. I love how Oda raises the stakes in his story through dynamics such as this one, forcing Sanji to step up in a big way because his captain has been taken out of the battle based on circumstance. And let me say this volume ends on a cliffhanger, as we see Sanji freaking out about the Lapins jumping up and down, ready to cause a landslide, while Dalton is rushed back to his town, leaving Vivi and Usopp on their own, and transforming into a bison using the Ox fruit, which is a Zoan-type transformation, whatever the heck that means. All because Wapple has returned to the island, and will likely clash with our heroes in the next volume. That's it for today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend, and stay tuned for Volume 16 coming this Friday. Thank you all for allowing me to take the week off last week. Again, I had finals, but I'm finally over them, so there should be some consistent uploads moving forward of this One Piece series, and thank you all for the support you've shown the series so far. This has been JT, and I hope you all have a great week.